deal with the government where they couldn't offer more than 2% in pay. We never even got offered the 2% in the last 4 years. Constricting free collective bargaining and then indenturing people if they dare to have a voice in it later on is a very difficult direction for any society.
And do you differ from that view, or no, not really? No. The same? Okay, thanks.
The employers need to be free to negotiate. At this moment they're not.
We may well be asking them that in the next panel.
We'll probably move on to those questions, but Mike, you want to come in on this point too?
Yes, to Frank first, Frank Ward first. You recently accused the Secretary of State, and I quote, of actively blocking any improvements to a possible deal. Why do you think this Tory government would actively deal?
Mr Lynch said earlier, I think it's something they've inherited from a previous Secretary of State for Transport. This is an agenda that's been pursued by the government, and it's very much anti-trade union. And we've seen the evidence of that yesterday. I think they've been looking for particular disputes that they could hang this particular legislation on, and it's been encouraged over the last 9 months. We've gradually worked towards the situation that we find ourselves in now.
Thank you. And same really to Mick Whelan and Mick Lynch.
Away in June, and instead the reverse has happened, that more unions have joined into campaigns against poverty, and where this is a campaign to drive poverty into our communities, I believe. So last week, and in the run-up to Christmas, I think the whole thing has been choreographed and stage managed so that the action went ahead, so that these announcements could be made according to a timetable, starting with Mr Sunak on Tuesday, I think, and then the announcements of these choreographed sessions on Monday. So the whole thing has been pre-arranged. It's almost as if there's been some kind of stage director running this dispute. That's why we couldn't make any progress before Christmas, even though I know the companies wanted to. They wanted to come to us with developed proposals, and they were not allowed to. Proposals deliberately at every stage in this dispute. And every time we make a suggestion, they have to go and ask the DFT, the 50 people that are working on this, whether they can make a change to the text or indeed the principles of the proposals. And it takes weeks every time.
And yourself, mate?
It's quite obvious from the chronology of what's occurred. I echo mixed sentiments, but quite simply, our employers know how the rail unions operate. They know that we here are just the faces of the trade unions. We have executive committees and boards who then decide whether things are viable or whether they go to our members. And the very activity of leaking a deal to the press last Friday, before they had the opportunity for it to be properly considered by the trade union to articulate a response back to the industry, they knew exactly what they were doing, and they must have been doing it on the behest of somebody else. Otherwise, why were they set up to fail?
Singling out the DFT, essentially Secretary of State, yes, it's hardwired into the system, isn't it? Process. The book lies with them. What's the motivation? What do they need to do to ensure that actually there's a compromise, there's a win-win solution, there's a resolution to this dispute? What steps do they need to take, and why on earth are they driving it? What's the motivation? Your assessment?
Well, it's not. They're not free actors themselves, the DFT. The Treasury has always run this dispute, whether it's been Mr Sunak in his previous incarnation, and the spending limits and all the rest of it. They decided to defund the railway by 2 billion, plus 2 billion in London Transport, and we've got loads of problems over there that have been slightly hidden by the national dispute. But the defunding of the railway system in general is at the bottom of this, and there's an attempt to defund a lot of services, I believe, and that's what is at the heart of all of the public sector disputes at the moment, that they're not funded properly and people aren't paid properly. People are getting poorer every week. But that is a deliberate policy to transfer wealth, I believe, from working people to people who have got money already. It's all part of a game that's being played in front of us, and this is how it plays out in detail. That's their motivation.
Frank?
Allow what happened yesterday for the business secretary to stand up and say we're going to crack down on trade unions. That's the motivation.
It does appear ideological. I hear stories from the government about wanting skilled, high-paid workers, and then their activities across all sectors, not just the rail sector, actually seem to want to challenge vocational people or people with skills and keep them down. You know, the fact that we hadn't had a pay rise for 4 years, we weren't seeking a pay rise for the 2 unit hit 5.2. Now, if our members were demanding a pay rise, not having had one for the previous 2 years when inflation was 5.2, how do you feel when they find last year inflation going to 14% and in massive double digits and possibly going higher than 14% this year? The idea that 4% and 4% for every condition that we've ever had, because that's what the current deal does, right? A 20% pay cut in real terms, right, for no future and no say in what you can do in the future. How could any trade union sell that to anybody they represent? I don't understand it.
Yes. Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay. Greg.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Can I ask you all, from the answers you've given so far, it doesn't seem that there is an end in sight for this particular dispute. So if we just take that as read, how much longer can you, your members, the entities that are your respective unions, financially sustain this dispute?
I've said it repeatedly, we're in it for the long haul. Our members will do this because it's their futures for as long as it takes. I rather flippantly said in the press the other day I'd like to see it resolved before I retire. I'm going in 3 years' time. I'd like to resolve it tomorrow, quite honestly. Our people don't want to be losing picket lines, they don't want to be on strike, and I'd rather go back to doing my day job of trying to rebuild this industry rather than where we are.
But specifically to my question, I understand everything you've said.
We can
but
financially sustain this for an awful long time.
And your members?
And our members.
Mr. Ward.
I mean, respectfully, I would probably turn the question on its head and ask how long do you think the DFT can afford to financially sustain the losses that the train operating companies in particular will be incurring as a consequence of this, which they are contractually bound to do, given their hand in actually managing these disputes. As far as our members are concerned, at some point in the near future we're going to be balloting our members, and they'll tell us at that point in time how long they're willing to continue with this, but it's really down to our members. At this moment in time, they seem to have the backbone to continue with this for a long time if necessary. We've had some members out in as many as 9 days straight as a consequence of this dispute, so they are suffering in their pay pocket, and some of them are low-paid workers. We hear a lot about train driver salaries and some manager salaries being up at £190,000 and that. The brunt of the changes which have been brought into this industry are going to force down on the lower paid workers. The booking offices are going to close across the country. A lot of those employees are getting paid at around £20,000 a year. A 4% pay offer to them is less than £20 a week as an increase. 4% to someone who's on 200,000 or even $500,000 in the case of Network Rail makes a big difference to them. But £20 facing at this moment in time, but they've still got the backbone to stand up there and say we're not putting up with it anymore.
Okay, I'm going to come back on one point you made to all three of you in a minute, but Mr. Lynch, just on that first question.
Yeah, well, our members have reballoted, all the members, 43,000, and they voted for a further 6 months mandate. We don't want to exercise that mandate. We are looking to develop a settlement, and they will decide ultimately through a referendum vote whether whatever is the final resolution to the dispute. We don't finance our members. We give them some dispute payments, which is money that's collected. They don't get strike pay, so they finance it themselves. So they will make their decisions, but at the moment, our action is having the same effect as it did on day one. And we will consider, once we've had the discussions with the government on Monday, we will have the discussions with the companies, and we go to our people and have mass meetings of reps all of the time. So we met 400 reps last week, immediately after the action, and we will meet them again when we get more proposals. So it's not just a diktat, they decide, in effect, through their elected people, the pursuit of the dispute, what action we should take, when we should take a pause, when we should go back to it, when we should have a referendum. So it will be sustained as long as they want it to be sustained.
Okay, so let's just take full stop. We know that COVID brought massive damage and that it fundamentally changed habits of customers, of passengers. We're seeing a lot fewer rush hour use, more social use, more weekend use of the railways post-COVID. Add in uncertainty on the part of consumers as to whether the train will even be running because of industrial action. How much damage has been done to the railway, particularly from consumer choice, which then plays to Mr. Ward's point about losses to the operating companies as a result, not just from industrial action but from changed habits? How much damage has actually been done to the railway?
Loads of damage has been done, but as I say, the damage is conceived and controlled in the Department for Transport. This is their project. They knew that there would be an industrial response from the trade unions. They decided to make what they would think is a great leap forward and provoke the workforce and attack the workforce. So the damage has been envisaged in Whitehall by people who know very little about the railway. Rather than trying to get consent and evolution of the railway, they went for this great leap forward, and it's blown up in their faces. So the damage is being conceived by this administration, and they are inflicting the damage. They have also brought forward a set of legislation that they quickly abandoned on the future structure of the railway. Maybe they'll come back to that, I don't know. Maybe there'll be a new transport minister that'll have another idea. So the damage is being caused by the inconsistent and reckless policy of the people that are in control of the railway, which is the current administration. It's not being caused by the workforce, who are prepared to work through change that is considered and agreed rather than imposed.
I understand. You won't expect me to agree with it, but you'll understand.
Well, most people do agree with it. Most people think our rails are in a terrible state.
I understand the perspective you're coming from, but surely you must agree that by making the railway uncertain in its operation from the eyes of the consumer, the people who pay a lot of money.
You're talking about when we're on strike and when we're not on strike?
When you're on strike.
What about the days when we're not on strike, when it's absolutely useless as well?
That's a whole other evidence
session. No, it's not. So since the timetable change that came a couple of years ago, the whole thing's been a disaster.
The question is, you must accept that people are being driven away from the railway because of the uncertainty of knowing whether it's running, because whether it's on strike or not, people are going back to their cars, they are going to coaches, they are just not travelling. We've seen the evidence from UK hospitality that the hospitality sector took an absolute bath in December when they're meant to, because people couldn't get into predominantly London.
It's not a question, is it? But I think it's your government's fault, is my answer when you get there.
Driving people away from the railway?
No, you are. Your government.
Reasons. But Mr Lynch is right. It's the policies of this government that are creating that uncertainty. This dispute is being prosecuted by the Department of Transport. They're making this happen. If they took their hands off the tiller as far as the employers are concerned and allowed them to negotiate with good faith, we could find resolutions to this. They won't do that. And the employers can't negotiate with us in good faith, because any attempt on their part to do so will effectively mean that they won't be compensated for the loss of revenue or for the loss of profits that they're going to, or the fallen profits that they're going to sustain going forward. I also think it's notable actually that despite the fact that we've come through COVID with all the emergency agreements that were put in place, that all of the companies that were under that managed to make profits, managed to pay dividends to their shareholders, never gave pay increases to their workers, and now we're in a situation whereby government are saying we've got to cut back the expenditure on the railway. The answer is let's get the workers to pay for it. This is political, this is not industrial.
To the question though, the more the railway is not operational because of industrial action, the less people are going to choose to use the railways even when there is not industrial action, which is going to fundamentally undermine the entire future of the railway, is it not?
Absolutely, and that seems to be government policy.
Mr. Whelan.
I'm going to echo my colleagues, so I hope to say in a slightly different way, not to bore you all. I'm quite sure we were the stakeholders that campaigned against the RPI increase in fares last year. We're the ones who've they said that we don't want the truncated timetables that are not serving the North West and North East has been. But we had seen footfall coming back. We had seen demands even from government departments, particularly Jacob Rees-Mogg, that people don't work from home. And we've seen more and more companies feeling that that wasn't effectively given the productivity they wanted. So we've seen a growth in leisure travel and we've seen a drift back post-COVID in normal traffic. But basically the railway itself, because of how it's currently operating, sustaining on a daily basis, isn't attractive. And of course, we're going to go into next January where there's going to be a further 5% increase in fares, where we'll see a further increase of what we call transport poverty and people's ability to afford to travel on our railways. So, yeah, but is the choice for a trade union when your employer and the government deliberately causes a dispute not to react and to do nothing? This was a fully expected political and industrial reaction from the bad actors who set this up in the first place. The companies decided to sign the new contracts in the post-pandemic world knew exactly what they were doing, knew how we organised, how we bargained with them for the last 2.5 decades. The government, in doing what they did, knew that there was going to be a reaction from the trade unions. I think what they didn't expect was us still to be here 6 or 8 months on. But for many people in this industry, this is existential.
Understood.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Jack, you wanted to have a supplementary
Yes,
and then come to Ben for the last
Thank you, Chair.
section.
This is to what Mr Lynch said a few moments ago around reduction of funding to the railways. You just suggested around 2 million. NAO figures show that the amount of government funding to the railways has actually doubled since 2015-16 to 2019-20. So where do you get your figures from?
I get it from the employers. They told me they've been asked to reduce their costs by 2 billion. I get it from the put money into it. I would ask why they put money into the railway and allow rolling stock companies and train operating companies and network rail subcontractors to extract billions of pounds of profit since the 90s straight into people's pockets in through dividends. So you'll do the same with health and all the rest of it eventually when you get the opportunity. So you'll fund them, but you'll shovel it into the private sector. That's the poll you read. I went on Good Morning Britain the other day where Richard Madeley was on attack mode. They did a poll shortly after that and said there was 75% support for the RMT. So it depends which poll you read of who's winning this. What is number one? We're not. I'm a more popular, but the fact is that we have the public contracts of employment and conditions. They will say yes. It's difficult to get that support going fully during intense industrial action, but there is broad support for all the people that are involved in disputes at this time, and there's very little for the support for the people that are opposing those disputes and trying to make people poorer.
Are you concerned about the increasing number of your members who are now turning out during strike days and turning up to work?
Well, we don't have those. We don't have reports. That's what we would call propaganda that we've been. They're members of my union.
Were previously.
You kind of articulated the problem with the percentage increase a moment ago when you compared the wages of a ticket office staff to a senior manager. Your negotiators, Joe Haynes and Bernard Donahue on Friday in the Times in this dispute. Is that at all feasible in your view? Just very brief, just yes or no answers would do.
Well, there's an element of that in one of the offers that we've got, and we're not averse to any sensible proposal. We'll consider it. It depends, what it is, but the format doesn't particularly bother